will this be an open source or a closed source phenomenon? And
Oh.
to the extent it's more open source in its nature, obviously, I think it has a greater opportunity to be transnational, an opportunity for unity rather than conflictual engagement, as you put it. So I think that's an interesting thing yet to be fully determined, though I think the weight of history and the weight of current momentum lies in a more open source phenomenon here.
No, so that's interesting. I think this open source versus closed LLM debate, right, is something that we've been seeing emerge more and more now the last few months. At the Global Technology Summit, that we held in Delhi recently, hosted by Carnegie and the Ministry of External Affairs in India. One of the key themes that came out, right, from prominent thinkers in the Indian tech space, including Nandan Nelakani, who helped in many ways the digital public infrastructure revolution that you and I have discussed, right, with the Aadhaar and the IndiaStack, as we call it. One of the things that was discussed was this idea of whether a country like India, right, as it figures out its own AI strategy and niche within the global AI space, should also focus more on open source models as opposed to getting into this race of building, the largest LLMs of the kinds that OpenAI, of course, right? So there's almost two sets of philosophies now emerging, right, that you're referencing. You have Mistral and I think Llama 2 and other such open source based approaches. And of course you have OpenAI and others who are not as open source driven. And you just said that you expected to go more towards open source. So I want to ask you why you think that. And also whether you feel that these LLMs will ultimately get commoditized and the real innovation, real wealth generation, real value add will only happen at the application layer. Will they become commoditized and become almost like electric utilities in a way?
Great. First of all, on the India point, look, this is your area of expertise, not mine, and most of what I've learned about it, I've learned from you. But I think my guess is that the ethos, the technology ethos of India will send this in a more open source direction. Again, the digital stack, the India stack, the notion of creating a platform that's enabling, commercial enterprises to benefit from that open commons, et cetera. Like, I just think that the success of that will infuse and inform the way the country addresses this generative AI revolution, with the slight offset of also the country rightly being concerned about regulation, guardrails, appropriateness, et cetera. So some balance there. So why open versus closed, and why my bias is slightly, though not determinatively, on the side of open source? A lot of it has to do with the way that these models have evolved in recent periods. So in the early days of this revolution, the emergent models were closed source models, and they were characterized by larger and larger scale, more parameters, more computation, more training runs, more data. And in recent periods, we've seen a companion, and those continue along that trajectory. More open source efforts have gone in the direction of scale down, smaller parameter counts, observing different scaling laws about the amount of computation that needs to be attached to it. And all the way to the point where you have people like Microsoft releasing the Phi 2 model, which is 2.7 billion parameters relative to the reputed 1.8 trillion parameters of GPT-4. That sort of scale down ethos, I think it implies a proliferation of a number of different models in the world, which again is sort of a profoundly open source phenomenon. And we won't live in a world that'll be dominated by one or two or three very large closed source models. Rather, I think there'll be a cooperation between closed and open in this regard, where increasingly these big closed source models, which were born they were extremely capable but quite isolated, are now open themselves through various interfaces, plugins, APIs, et cetera, to the world around them. And while these big models may have unique capabilities around world knowledge and some simulacrum of reasoning capability, their ability to cooperate with, to call upon smaller domain-specific models that will, I think, largely be open source in character, may mean that, again, I see a bias towards open source innovation in this world. I think Meta is one of the extreme leaders here. I also think we may just have this a little bit like we do in our tech ecosystem at large, an interplay of closed source technologies and open source technologies. So it'll be some blend, but I think this is going to be a more open phenomenon than was initially believed.